I'm really sorry that because of the technical difficulties this morning, you were not able to hear Bob and Pat and what they had to say. They give so much to this congregation, and we hoped you would be able to see it. We've had issues. We had an issue at 5 o'clock last night as well. Not sure what happened, but perhaps we can play that again at some point. If I say the name Warren Zevon, do you know who I'm talking about? Anybody know? Oh, I could have figured some of you folks out. And I know. I want to tell you a little bit about him. I first knew of Warren Zevon in the 70s because a song that he did, he wrote and he sang, was part of a movie that I went to see. The name of the song is A Werewolf in London. And he wrote it was played for the movie An American Werewolf in London. And I really did not know his name before that, even though he had written other songs that were very popular, but they were covered often by other artists. Warren Zevon was born to a couple. His father was a gangster. And at one point, they finally moved to the West Coast. His parents split up, and he went to the West Coast with his mother. And then when he turned 16, he went to New York City to try to make his name in music. His writing is very raw. His poetry is very good, but he tends to tell things kind of how they are, and they often make you uncomfortable, or at least they do me. Then there are those songs that are a little more comfortable. I don't know if you remember the song that Linda Ronstadt did, Poor, Poor, Pitiful Me. He wrote it. That was one of the songs he wrote. She had 3 songs he wrote on that album. Warren Zevon was very, very well liked by the critics, but the people in general population didn't buy his albums that much. Very, very low sales. But he would get royalties from what he had written. He'd get royalties from what other people did, and he could make it, and he got along. And he had this long-term relationship in the 70s and early 80s, and they had a son. But Warren Zevon could get to a certain point in his life, and once he got there, he would either maintain for a time, or then immediately it would kind of crash. No one ever said this about him, but he kind of reminds me of that guy in high school. You know, the one who everybody liked, and he had so much potential, but he always seemed to be getting in trouble. You know him? I do. I know enough to cover some of you if you need me. Some said that about me. He would get to a certain point, and he did that in the 80s, the early 80s, and then he crashed. He used to, after this point, he would talk about that 70s, early 80s time period when he'd perform on stage as being kind of a psychotic break because he just really didn't know what was happening. It was really crazy kind of stuff. He had all of these friends. Jackson Browne produced one of his albums for him. He was a good friend. They loved his music, and they loved him. And in the mid-'80s, his long-term relationship, she left him. She left him because she said that he was totally consumed with drugs, alcohol, and guns. Not a good combination. He went to treatment. And he came out sober. And for the most part, I think he stayed sober for the rest of his life. But that only helped in certain ways. He would still have those periods of time where he would just crash. But his friends, his former relationships never left him. They talked about how much they loved him and how much he loved them. In the 90s, he became more popular, and he married. And toward the end of the 90s, he was doing okay. And during that time period, he became a really good friend of David Letterman. And Letterman, from the early days, would have him on his show. And when Paul Schaefer wasn't there to lead the band, he came to lead the band. And he became famous as much for being on Letterman as he did anything. And he was deathly afraid of doctors. He wouldn't go to a doctor. He had a dentist he would go to, and he often said that if the dentist couldn't cure it, he was really in tough shape. So in 2002, he went to his dentist, and as he's talking with him, he said, "I've been short of breath lately. I can't, when I'm doing these performances, I don't have enough breath." And the dentist said, "You should go to a doctor. You may have congestive heart failure." So he went to the doctor, and he didn't have congestive heart failure. He had lung cancer. And they said, "You have 3 months to live." They later re-diagnosed it as mesothelioma, but they said, "You've got 3 months." And within a month, he was on David Letterman's show. He was the only guest for the whole show. And Letterman said to him, you've got some health issues. And he said yes, and he recounted what he had been through. And he said, "Are you dying?" He said, "Yes, I'm dying." And Letterman said to him, or asked him, said, "Is there anything that because you are in this position, and you're dying, that you know that I don't know?" And he said, "Well, I don't know, unless it's enjoy every sandwich." Sometimes people, when they drop their guard and let us see who they truly are, can touch our lives and say to us something that we might not have heard otherwise. I mean, think of the wisdom of what he said. Enjoy every sandwich. Something so basic, so everyday-ish. Enjoy what happens in your life. Today, you and I celebrate what in our tradition we call the Feast of All Saints and of All Souls Departed. We combine them together, and we often bring photos, and they'll be up here too, of people who we want to remember who have died. We have names that I will read during the Eucharistic prayer that you have given me of people. And we will remember them, and we will remember how they were saintly in our lives. Now, I'm the first to tell you, Warren Zevon was not the image that most of us paint of who a saint is. But I also want to suggest that of the names and the photos that you have brought, there's no perfect person in there either. And sometimes there are some that are even less so than others. I think that you and I are guilty of idolizing saints, raising them so highly in our own image, in our own vision, that we take away their humanity, who they are. And I don't think that's a good thing. And I think we're also guilty of raising our idols to saints. And I don't think that's any better when we make them into divine images when they're still human. I think that there's something about every person being made in the image of God, and as our reading said from 1 John this morning, a child of God. That we can even say that Warren Zevon, in his own way, may have been a saint. They gave him 3 months to live, and a little over a year later, David Letterman came on his show, and he said, "My friend Warren Zevon died 2 days ago." One of the ironies is that right before he was diagnosed, he released an album, the title of which, "My Rides Here," was a song about dying. A year after David Letterman made this announcement, an album came out, the title of which was "Enjoy Every Sandwich." And it was all of these friends of his singing his song. He received 2 posthumous Grammys. He'd never been recognized before. In 2007, his wife published his biography. He made her promise that she would be the one that would do it and that she would tell the truth. Exactly as he did it. She wouldn't sugarcoat it or make him look any better. She would just do it. So she invited his friends to write parts of it. And they did that. They told the dark side of him as well as the other side. But this you know from everything that they did, they loved him. And they were loved by him. You see, sometimes we want to paint the picture of saints as doing things beyond what you and I can do. We want to make it somehow great. But I think the essence of a saint is in this one very act, that for however long they can do it, they let us glimpse something about God. They let us glimpse something about God. So there it is that we bring today, these folks that you and I bring to the table, literally. And we do that holy act of remembering them. He wrote one song after he was diagnosed. The title of it is "Keep Me in Your Heart." So as you and I observe those in our lives who for whatever amount of time have allowed us to glimpse something about God, I want to ask 2 things of you and me. Keep them in your heart. And as you live your life from this day forward, enjoy every Sabbath.